So last year I did a really popular session. Unfortunately this year I don't have any Minecraft stuff, but I'm going to, so I know a lot of people are disappointed. Please leave the room now if you want to. What I wanted to talk about instead was more kind of big picture. You know, we have a lot of deep dive sessions this week, but really about how do I put it all together, but also talk about, you know, the world's changing. People have elaborated on technology already, but also business is changing. So we have things like digital transformation's a really big deal. So I'm not going to talk too much about what it is, because I think, you know, the general industry feel is that pretty much every company is either doing it, wants to do it, has done it, or is failing to do it. I think it's a really big deal for integration, and I wanted to talk about how we as integration people can survive in that digital transformation world, but actually some kind of applied steps to how I think we can be leaders in that world. So I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to tell you guys too much about me, because I think most people know me from last year anyway. What I wanted to do though was talk about positioning, what digital is today, position and integration, but then get on to the real stuff, the real steps to being successful. So if we think about why should I care about digital transformation, and the industry's telling us that all these companies want to do digital. It's about, you know, modern technology, bringing technology and the customer closer together, and just changing the way we do business to just be better than what we were. But the problem is that most businesses that are trying to do this, they kind of see IT as being a massive blocker to doing this. So it's kind of like agile, but then more stuff on top of that. So with IT being viewed as the obstacle, many companies at the same time aren't really happy about how they do integration today. So if you think about the companies you work with, many of them would like to do it better, but just don't really know how to. So, you know, with that in mind, for digital, really integration is one of the key areas about that. Now, in addition to that, if we think about the position of integration in the industry, I found this really great Gartner graph, which they call the Gartner hype cycle model. You could also call it the market and BS model if you wanted as well. And the idea is that with this, I can overlay different sort of meta themes on this model. Just to, you know, this is my interpretation of the industry, but just to kind of position where things are. So one of the things I think's interesting, if you look at the communication in the industry this year, is there's been a big die-off in terms of the way people or the noise about API economy. So if you think last year and the year before, it was a really big deal, everyone's talking about it. This year it seems to have really dropped off. One of my thoughts is that maybe people like Microsoft and Amazon have turned API management into a more commodity service, whereas in the past it was a premium thing that vendors could make a lot of money selling. Maybe now it's, you know, people like Microsoft making it a very low cost solution on Azure. Maybe that money's not in that market anymore, which is perhaps why it's dying off. But certainly two of the trends related to my presentation are, firstly, everybody's talking about digital transformation. Secondly, integration seems to have replaced API economy as being one of the big technical themes at the minute. So let's see if we can actually take advantage of this. You know, how many times over the last few years have businesses really been excited about integration? That's something we really need to try and leverage if we can. So with that in mind, the question, is, in my organization, if businesses are moving on and everything's changing, am I being left behind? And here's some thoughts just from people I've met, customers and stuff, of some of the things that I've heard, particularly in the BizTalk ecosystem. So, you know, the number of companies you meet where they don't really know how to do environment management, builds, deployments, testing, all these real basic things, you know, people have been struggling with. But actually people have been struggling with these for quite a few years now. So the key thing is, if you're seeing these themes and you're thinking, am I being left behind? The answer is probably yes. You know, people have started solving these problems, but a lot of companies haven't adopted that. So with that in mind, what I really wanted to focus on was a journey, you know, a series of steps that perhaps you can get some ideas how to follow to take our integration within the company and bring it into this digital transformation world. So I think the first one's about culture. You know, that this is really the underlying thing. We need to change the culture of how integration is viewed in the organization. And if we think about the typical organization, we've got our integration team, and we all kind of think we're like the superhero team, the Justice League, you know. We solve the really hard problems, we're the guys who do the complex stuff. But the problems, the business don't view us like that. They view us as perhaps more like the suicide, where they're like a necessary evil. They can do some stuff, but the business don't really want us to be there. Ideally, they may throw us in prison if they could, but there's a big gulf in the gap between how IT views integration and the business view integration, and that's the thing that really needs to change for us to be successful. So if we know where we want to be, let's think how we get there. So in the industry, the first big change is the perception of what people are telling businesses that they should think about integration. So we've got messages like two-speed IT, to be successful, you need to be good at integration. Digital transformation, successful, you need to be good at integration. We also have vendors out there and industry commentators who are reinforcing this message over and over again. So if the business is starting to take an interest in integration, that means that there's likely to be some investment in us to be able to get good at it. At the same time, we still need to manage expectations. So this is one of the things I think is really important. And if you were here last year, you would have seen a slide I put up which was like this, but in purple. And really, what I was kind of trying to say was that, look, the integration that we did 15, 20 years ago still exists for many businesses. That kind of mainframe integration, ETL type data integration, those stories still exist, but we've got a whole bunch of new stuff as well. And that's really why integration is probably harder today than it's ever been, even though some of the technologies are trying to make that simpler. The range of stuff the average integration architect needs to think about is really broad. Now, I think one of the things here is the sort of understanding from a non-technical perspective that's why some of these things are difficult. It's not, every use case isn't going to be spin up a lightweight workflow and just connect a bunch of APIs. That's just one use case out of many. So some tips in that area then. So firstly, it's a great time to be in integration, but in order to change the culture, we need to start thinking about how we sort of manage the reputation, the PR, the marketing of how we do integration. If we can get the right messages out, people will start buying into what we're doing. But at the same time, it's not magically going to get perfect or easy. We need to manage those expectations. So if we go on to the second step, we've talked about culture. The second step's about the teams we have, how they may change. And I think Richard alluded to this a little bit in his presentation earlier, that the way companies are starting to structure people and teams to deliver integration's been changing, and we expect it'll happen more so. So, in the past we really had this centralized integration team, center of excellence, whatever you want to call them, and the idea was this was your suicide squad, your group of guys who, that deep dive, biz talk, hardcore, know their stuff inside out. But all of the other teams that wanted integration are asking these guys to do work on their behalf. And while that meant you had, all your skills centralized, there was a lot of challenges about how you scale the team. Everyone in the other teams always depends on the integration team, and they can become a blocker. But at the same time, businesses also view having a big team of specialists to be quite expensive. So, as part of companies adopting Agile, we tended to see more cross-functional teams evolving. So we'd have, maybe a team which had integration, mobile, web, SAP, database, a bunch of different skills within there. And one of the problems that they had was that they tried to make the team be a group of people who were a jack of all trades, but not recognizing that some of these skill sets aren't very interchangeable. So while there was some progress that was made, there was still a load of difficulties with that. Now, what we're finding today, and I think the thing we'll see in the future, is this idea of integrators everywhere. So we now have our integration coordinators, who are our specialists. And these guys, rather than being the ones who do all the work, they tend to be more into coaching, more into guidance around how to do things, training, making sure people do stuff in a consistent way. And then in the teams who actually do most of the work, we tend to find new roles starting to evolve. So the first one would be something, Gartner called it an ad hoc integrator. So this is a guy who has some integration skills, their skills are developing, but they wouldn't necessarily be an integration specialist. Likewise, we're also seeing citizen integrator emerge as a role, so I think some teams will have citizen integrators in there as well. Now, if we think about what these roles mean, so I've put a few things up on the board about the kinds of things they would do, but I wanted to use a comparison with Marvel to give you guys an idea of the difference between these roles. So if we imagine Our integration specialist's a bit like Iron Man, a bit like Tony Stark, so he's the guy who really knows his stuff. He's the guy who builds all the tech for the other superheroes to, power them up and level them up and get them doing stuff, and, he's really the boy. But the ad hoc integrator, he's the person, you want many of these people to do lots of integration in your organization, so maybe that is better fit as a war machine. So the idea is that you can take somebody who's in the military, who knows their stuff, suit them up with an Iron Man suit, and they can go and deal with your everyday superhero issues. The big difference between the two is, while War Machine's pretty good at taking out terrorists, when you've got aliens coming out the sky and you've got nuclear missiles headed to New York, sometimes you just need an Iron Man. But he's, there's only really one of those. So that's really the kind of analogy of the difference. And the integration specialist's there when you need him. If you've got hard work to do, get him to do it. But really, he should be coaching these ad hoc integrators. Citizen integrator's a bit more interesting, I think. So he's, possibly not even a technical person would be the most likely scenario. And really, you've got to be careful about what you let this guy do. So I thought maybe he's a bit more like Falcon, where, there's just a guy running around a field and suddenly we get him to come along, we stick a big set of wings on him, and we just hope he doesn't crash and take everything out. Thank you. So tips in terms of the team then. So anyone can be an integrator. That's a really important message we need to get out there. And instead of fighting that as integration specialists, we need to really embrace it. We need to kind of help coach people how to do integration, which is in line with strategy and in line with the interests of the organization, and not be the blocker. But sometimes we need the business to just recognize that it is difficult, and we need the specialists, we need Iron Man. Okay, next up we're going to talk about the platform. So this is one of my favorite bits. We'll get a little bit more into the tech now. So here's a story that I've seen quite a bit. I actually had this story a couple of weeks ago. So let's pretend we've got a random software vendor who does integration. Let's call them Thoroughbred Software or something like that. And they phone up, maybe in this case, actually, they phoned up our finance team, and they were learning about some of the challenges they had about data and reporting. And they kind of said, well, look, we understand your problem. We can sell you this software that'll solve all of your problems. And the finance guys didn't even know we had integration, really. That's a big miss in our organization, where we hadn't really internally, sold the message of how good an integration stack we've got. So the finance team are talking to this vendor. They get a little bit down that journey, and then they started talking to IT and said, how do we integrate this vendor? When we jumped in and we're like, well, hang on a minute, let's have a look at what we've already got. But the thing we're seeing on some of the vendors is we might have, Thoroughbred Software who might have a really great integration stack, but what they often have is the bit, to me, where the differentiation to Microsoft is the big picture, the big platform. So we might find that they'll say, well, we've got this other thing you need to do for your integration solution. You'll have to go and buy best of breed from another vendor to complement what we have. So we find that their stable's got a few donkeys missing out of it. We come to Microsoft and the big picture. So John Fancy did this really great white paper earlier in the year called Integration Evolved, which was, that was a really positive step forward for us all, because it gave us this, this strategy we could point customers at and say, look, that's what integration's all about. And I came here prepared to say, look, that's great, but actually, in my world, integration's a bit bigger than just logic apps and BizToken and stuff. And I was going to try and convince everybody why that was the case. But fortunately, Jim came and did the thing that Microsoft haven't done for years, which is said, the secret sauce to our integrations, actually the rest of Azure. And that's music to my ears, because I had this slide here where I was going to say, look, that is the Azure platform, and the bit that's really, really key for integration is the relationships between the integration piece and the other stuff on Azure. So how many times do you do something in integration where you just need some custom coded stuff? You need a database, you need application performance management. It's all there on Azure. I don't need to go and engage with a vendor. I just 3 clicks and I've got what I want. And it goes on my enterprise agreement if I've got one. That's the real sort of empowerment of agility and the empowerment of digital transformation, is we're getting rid of these provisioning, we're getting rid of the fact that, in most IT today, procurement's probably a bigger blocker than actual delivery of tech. Okay, so what I wanted to do next was kind of evolve into this green box. Then we've got integration with its sort of relationships on the rest of the platform. But actually, let's think about the capabilities we want in integration. So I've thrown a few up here, and the usual suspects of ETL, messaging, orchestration, APIs, and we've got stuff in Azure and on the server stack that fill all of these boxes. And this is a great place to be. When we talk to customers about Microsoft integration, draw this picture and they're going to get it. They're going to go, right, all the things I want, I have widgets that I can set up very easily to do this. The big problem we have with this picture is until recently, Microsoft have never really talked about it like this. And it was a little bit of a joke for the Microsoft guys. I'd put Cortana Integration Suite, because we actually do this in the BI world. We just don't do it in the integration world. So maybe now's the time in the big picture to kind of bring these things together and market them as one suite, because actually the story around that suite's fantastic, and we saw that in the keynote. So if we think about some tips for the platform then, so we've got more technologies than ever before. We've got to be careful that we choose the right technologies for our organization. So whether that means you choose on-prem tech, cloud, you choose hybrid, you choose messaging, BizTalk, whatever, you've got the choice to pick the right things. I think you've got to be careful that it's not a free-for-all. So one of the challenges when you particularly empower the ad hoc integrator, is they just go and create stuff on Azure that might be a little bit under the radar. You've got to be careful to manage that, but that's a hell of a lot better than being in the position where you're waiting 6 months to get kit provisioned on-prem. That blocks your project, so that's really bringing things forward. Now, I wanted to talk about architecture a little bit as well. I work as an integration architect mainly, and I think this is the bit where, as we become empowered in digital, as we become agile, as we use the cloud, architecture gets that little bit more difficult. And by that I mean kind of managing the architecture. So I always try to talk to our guys about the idea of colouring outside the lines. So I think I missed calling this out earlier, but at the university that I do some work with, our sort of integration specialist to ad hoc integrators about 20/80 as a balance. So we've got a lot of ad hoc integrators doing integration work today. The big challenge is, how do I make sure they develop within the constraints that I want them to develop in? So if you imagine, as an architect, I want to create a blueprint of what I want them to do. And when they come to do something, I'll go like, look, if it's something we've done before, go and do it like that. And I don't want them to reinvent the wheel every time. So this idea of colouring inside the lines, I say to them, look, when you feel like you're going to cross the line, if you think I don't know about it, come and have a chat with me. That's the real important bit as an architect. If they're in a safe zone, I don't really care that much. The bit is where they start breaking the architecture. I need to know about it before it's got to the point that I can't undo things that might have been done a bad way. So the old Spider-Man tagline of great power, great responsibility, that's really important in this case if you're going to empower people who haven't got the integration specialist skills. An example from a real project that I saw where this happened was, we had this project that started, which was pretty simple. It was a web app, had an API, talked to a couple of SaaS things, talked to a couple of on-prem things, and from an architecture perspective, you'd think that was pretty straightforward. By the time the thing went live, we had something like on the right, and you're like, how can you deal with it? How did it even get to that point? And that's all because, agile teams go crazy without anybody knowing they're doing it. So we need to be able to manage this as an architect. And from an architecture perspective, that's really the challenge of balance and delivery versus architecture. We need to deliver business value, but technology's changing, requirements are changing. Flexibility is really key here. We've got to have an architecture that we can change as we need to, but we need to think of architecture really as a journey rather than a destination. We need to think about these things changing over time. A sort of target architecture, by the time you get there, Azure's probably changed, and you'd maybe use Service Fabric instead of web roles or something like that now. You've got to be thinking that in mind when you design these things. So one of the things, just to give you guys a few thoughts on some of the things I do on a practical basis. So one of them is we've got integration blueprints. So we use Confluence, which is like a sort of wiki on steroids kind of thing. In there, I've got all of the projects. We sort of have really good collaboration between dev and architecture about what we're doing, how we're doing it. We've got a list of blueprints, and we've got some kind of approval status. So if you're going to use a pattern that's in there and it's marked as approved, you're green lighted to just get on and do it. But if there's a pattern that you're looking at and it's got, come and speak to Mike before you do this, because I'd at least want to know why you're going to do it like that. You know, that's the kind of thing as an architect we need to be kind of balancing. But do you know what? As being a realist here, we have to recognize that it doesn't matter what checks and balances you put in place. If we're in an agile world where things are happening fast, these things are going to happen whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter how many times you try to control it. So I think there's some great tools out there. I just wanted to call out things like dependency mapping. So we've got application and insights and BizTalk 360 have some great stuff in there where we can start to visualize what talks to what. So on the left-hand side is a component that we've got in the university where it's kind of a legacy thing we inherited, but we put app insights into it. So at least we can now start actively seeing what it talks to. And that kind of gives us a visualization where we can start understanding and unpicking some of the spaghetti to manage that. Maybe with with logic apps and power apps, one of the big differences between these and BizTalk is the kind of coupling between your transport and your workflow. So that's quite interesting, I think, because logic apps and power apps, if you had the question of what systems do I talk to, I guess that might be a lot easier to answer from there than it would be from BizTalk. So in terms of architecture, the tips would be the biggest challenge is stealth IT. Stealth IT within IT, in my opinion. Devs spinning up stuff in his ear, not talking about it. I find out 6 months later, and I'm like, "Why have you done that? You've ruined everything." Think about dependencies. We need to govern these. But the most important message as an architect is actually get off your ivory tower, get down, get involved in the teams, collaborate, be involved, know what's going on, because it's all about coaching. That's the feature of architecture within that kind of environment. Now, the next bit about this journey's, I call it assembly lines, and I've got my little Homer icon there about which button does the deployment. But the way we build software is really key to being successful, I think, as well. So if you think about this diagram here, I kind of pinched this off an agile manufacturing thing, but I think it gives a really good message about where does your organization fit. So what I find is that a lot of organizations talk about the idea of lean startup, and they'll aim at things like, oh, we want to be like Twitter. But the reality is that kind of organization is really the top left where that sort of stallion's running along. They might be really responsive and great at IT, but compared to the average enterprise, the number of different things they deal with is probably minuscule. I'm used to working with companies who'll have hundreds of systems, all integrating with each other. There's all sorts of politics. They've got years of legacy ways of doing business, let alone legacy IT to deal with. So while you might compare to that, most organizations, it's not really a great comparison. The reality is that many organizations tend to be down where I think it's a stegosaurus. I'm sure my little one will correct me if I'm wrong there, but the idea of this slow-moving old dinosaur that has absolutely no relation to BizTalk's T-Rex, by the way. But there's this slow-moving dinosaur that is the classic IT organization where digital transformation's saying, I want to be fast and change and be agile, but IT's slow-moving. The bit where we want to be is where that chameleon is. So we know we're in an environment where lots of things change. There's loads to deal with, but we need to get our ways of delivering integration need to be leveled up a bit so we can deal with that. So coming back to assembly lines, and that was why we need them. What is an assembly line? So I really pitch this to my team is, look, we build loads of different types of stuff, and to be honest, I don't really care whether it's an integration solution, a web app, or whatever. The thing we have is we'll build lots of them. So if I build, let's pretend I'm building a REST API. If I build 5 REST APIs, I want to build them as similar as possible and have as much reuse across how I build them. They may do different stuff, but if I can build them in the same way, we get into like a sort of a manufacturing type idea where, you go to Nissan car plant, they don't have 200 guys who each start from scratch and build a car on their own with just a handful of tools. They'll have a manufacturing line, and that becomes applicable in software. So if I can build most of my BizTalk apps as similarly as possible, that means if in my team, I can take a guy who's worked on one app, who's never seen another BizTalk app, but 80% of it he knows what it's already going to do because he's used to the way of working. It's only the real features that are different in terms of business features. So we try to have this idea of an assembly line per type of component. And if we drill into what an assembly line is, we've got things like, how we do development. So we might use Azure Dev Test Labs. We might use Visual Studio for source control, spec flow, behavior-driven development, build and deployment, application insights, all these different features that can help us do development. But the idea is that we should use the same ones all the time. So we've got a team of like 15 people. We don't want to have different tech for every single thing we build. Just to call out what dev might look like. So here's a real-world example of one of our dev labs. So this one's our BizTalk dev lab, which is on Azure, runs in a dev test lab, has VMs for BizTalk. And actually, I've used this model with a number of different customers, so you don't have to be a company who's really embracing Azure. I worked with a company in China who's doing an on-prem BizTalk deployment, yet all of their dev test was in Azure, but for political reasons, their other stuff was on-prem. So some tips then: digital transform will fail if we can't effectively build stuff. So if we get to the point where we can't deploy stuff, we're building code that's buggy as hell, that's going to give us loads of problems. This is all coming back to reputation, culture. People want things to work. But at the same time, the cloud can help us, our assembly lines can help us remove the blockers to why we don't deliver software very well. And I think the last section I'd just really like to cover, I'm going to go through quickly because I think I'm probably struggling for time a bit. But I also wanted to talk about insights. If we're going to change culture, insights are really important. We want to give people information about what's happening in integration. And I think many customers have seen we have this scenario right now. We've got our BizTalk secret box that nobody knows what happens in it. We've got our integration ninja, who's this guy with years of experience, and he's the only one who knows how to work out if we've received an order. And that's a terrible place to be when you think about it. If you take away the fact that it's BizTalk, take away the fact that it's integration in any business scenario, that would be horrible. You wouldn't want to be there. So we need to kind of think about how do we let these people who have questions about the secret box, how do we let them see inside it? And with Azure and with the Microsoft stack, I think we've got loads of really good ways we can do this. And actually, to me, this is the big differentiator. So when I was talking about, I think I called them thoroughbred software or something like that earlier, when we talk about some of the other vendors, and they do the core stuff pretty well, but when we bring in our wider platform, this is where we really stand out, because we can, with very little effort, start doing things like, we've got BAM already, but it's a bit nasty. But with the new stack, we've got Power BI. If we want process analytics, we can start really doing some cool stuff to light up for the business how important it is. So this diagram from Power BI, this is from an Azure BizTalk standard implementation I did, which has been running for about 9 months. So if I could give the business one message, which was to say, right, in the last 9 months, just under $500 million of business has been through your BizTalk standard running on Azure, and you've paid next to nothing for it. That's a pretty powerful message. They're going to get that, and they're going to understand why integration and why BizTalk's important. If we take it a bit further, well, why don't we just engage with the business as well? I said the question before was, the user says, BizTalk Ninja, has my order been received? Well, let's integrate with Yammer. That's where users are going to typically be. For the university, we use Yammer quite a bit. Some people use Slack. We can integrate with these and actually have the systems tell people, we've received a really big order. This is the number for it. Here it is, just making you guys aware. It's in the community that they're already engaging in. Another one that I think is really great is cost insights. So who here knows how much their BizTalk investment in their organization costs? And if anybody does, I'll buy them a pint. The answer is no, nobody knows. But actually on Azure, because we've got an enterprise agreement, because we've got the billing API, I can tell you exactly how much per day my dev, test, production, BizTalk stuff costs. That's powerful. You're not going to get that on premise. That's an insight businesses aren't used to getting, so you can look to optimize that cost. And actually just showing people this in its own right. If you're a business manager, this is the kind of information people want to see. Security insights. We all hear from organizations how conscious security people are about implementations we do. On Azure, we've got security center. So, hey, you know what? Let's give people a view at what the security of our systems are. Here I've got on the left-hand side the security, the Azure Security Center deep dive bit, which would be for IT pros. So an IT pro can go and have a look at these servers that are connected up to it, see what's working well, deal with any issues. But hey, you know what? At the same time, there's a Power BI management pack for that stuff as well. So I can have my CTO who doesn't care about, you know, the detail of it. He just wants to know how many green stuff have I got and how many red stuff have I got, and is the number of red stuff going down? Great, you know, that's a really, again, a really powerful insight. So go to a different type of stakeholder now. We're now in the developer space. We've got App Insights. So if we're working with App Insights, we can use this from BizTalk, from REST services, .NET applications. We can plug in and we can get these really deep insights for almost no work. The cost of these things on Azure as well is peanuts. You know, if you really want to know more about this, I did an Integration Monday session a few weeks back. But App Insights is a great way for developers to work out, does your application really work in the real world like you think it works? We can troubleshoot all sorts of stuff and you know, do some good stuff with App Insights, but at the same time, again, you know, maybe the product owner might be the user this time, so we can publish the Power BI content pack for App Insights, connect it to our Insights instance, and the developer gets the deep dive, but maybe the product owner gets a, you know, like a high-level view of how his application's working. Is it fulfilling the things he wants to get from that? Next, we've got IT Ops. So IT Ops, we've got the same story. So we can have OMS suite. We can connect that to many Azure services. We can start seeing what's going on. We can see best practice analysis of SQL, all sorts of other stuff. Jeff did a really great one about logic apps in OMS yesterday. So if you combine that and the audit logs for Azure, we've got some great evolving story to bring IT Pro into our integration world because we're using Azure. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the dev one because it's boring. So tips then, right? Tips are, firstly, insights, in my opinion, are the secret sauce to culture change. You know, you can try and change the culture, but if you're showing people the value of the data that's in the platform, you're releasing it, you're making it available, people will start changing their opinion about integration. They'll start wanting to do it. They'll start choosing one vendor over another because they understand it now. Insights make people feel aware and involved. So, you know, if you can start suddenly getting your, you know, not your IT guys, but your finance guy, he starts liking integration because he can see it. It's not a secret box. He doesn't have to fight a ninja and win to find out whether he got his orders coming in. You know, that's a real powerful message. So with that in mind, those were my kind of my most important tips, I think, that'll help you on a world or on a journey into digital transformation. I think my key message is that digital transform, I think, is going to be the best thing to happen, best non-technical thing to happen to integration for a while because people are going to invest in it. We saw integration, I thought, before this week, I thought was a good platform to empower integration and empower digital. The messages that I've heard yesterday and today, that's reinforced that and added much more to it. So I think we're in a really great place to really go and, you know, kick some arse in the industry now. The key thing, I think, for us, though, is that here's an opportunity to be leaders in digital, and I think that's where we want to be as integration specialists. Thank you very much, and any questions?